So is the new Descent going to be a Gloomhaven killer? I understand that that's the intention for the game, and being an enthusiast of RPG/dungeon crawling titles for my board gaming collection, I'm very interested in this title. I'm very interested in this release, but there's a certain duality that has me asking some questions. Not only will it compete with Descent, but is this the correct direction for Fantasy Flight Games to take with such an iconic title? Now, right off the bat, it makes sense to continue the Descent narrative in Terranoth and to continue that aspect of the game because it's twofold. Descent First Edition, which I still enjoy playing. I love my copy. I believe it was released around 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. And since then, it's had a number of expansions. This led to Second Edition, which had a great run, I think almost like a decade or 13 years. Lots of expansions. The Descent experience is out there in the ecosystem. It makes sense to continue it because enthusiasts of the system like myself, there's a very good likelihood that we're going to pick it up because we're interested to see the continued journey. Likewise, new players that are out there, it's a chance to bring them in. So it made sense to continue Descent. But in calling it Descent, is it still Descent? And from that perspective, what the two takeaways, being an enthusiast of Gloomhaven and an enthusiast of Descent Second Edition, the two really important points for me that really distinguished both of these games, and this will, of course, will lead into if the next iteration of it will hold fast. Gloomhaven has some interesting mechanics with the cards. It kind of controls the random. You've got magic items. You've got heroic classes. But for me, the two things that really captivated my imagination and made me go, wow, this is a game that I want to play. This is an ecosystem that I want to explore, was the fact that you are literally based on the mission, success, failure, and what you unlock, opening up an entire world. You have all those, no spoilers, you have all those stickers that you're placing on the map. And then there's also the discovery of new characters. The fact that you don't begin the game. Literally, the characters are hidden in boxes, and you unlock them based on achievements and other aspects. That was so addictive. Of course, in addition to strong rules, a great narrative, fantastic artwork and components, all of those, yes, yes, and yes. But that was the leverage where I was sold on Gloomy. With Descent Second Edition, what sold me was the fact that the game itself, from a RPG dungeon crawler-esque type game, did everything just well enough, just good enough. And this synergy is what made the title amazing. So it had a leveling up system, but it certainly wasn't iconic or in great detail. It had loot just well enough. It had a variety of monsters that could be controlled by the Overlord or using the AI. The quests were had variables just enough. So it kind of covered all of those. It had a boss fight at the end. It had all of those check boxes of what makes an RPG board game interesting, and the fusion of them created something greater than the sum of its parts. So now the question going into the new Descent, what will it bring? Now it's digital. Now, certainly, I like the miniatures. The artwork was kind of 50-50. I kind of prefer more of the classic fantasy type artwork, but admittedly that's highly subjective, and it could just be because I'm used to Descent First Edition and Second Edition for so long that's literally influenced my perspective. But they're doing a new art direction. The components, bringing in 3D furniture and stuff, they're kind of going Hero Quest-like, and we do have the new reprint of Hero Quest on the way, but it's AI controlled. It's AI controlled. It's app controlled. And this is where I'm kind of on the fence, because on the one hand, I'm a little bit old school. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of digital mediums, and I spend a lot of time digitally. I want to unplug. That was one of the reasons why I got started in board gaming in the first place, was to have this analog experience of rolling dice, flipping cards, playing at my own pace. I like the idea literally that Runebound, I'm also a very big enthusiast if we're talking about Fantasy Flight. Runebound First Edition, 2008. I still pull that out and play it. I still enjoy it. It regularly hits the table, both as the group and solo. It's going to be playable as long as it holds up. When you're app driven, once that app support stops, the game is dead. It's not going to go on. Now, how many of us out there, honest, full disclosure, how many of us out there are buying a board game where we're saying, look, I want to play this for the next 10 or 15, 20 years? But admittedly so, if there's titles in my collection and I love it, I want to have the option to play it, especially given how fast Fantasy Flight drops support and moves on. They're classic kings of an edition and then an edition reset, dropping stuff, not printing it. That's not a problem with analog. You go to digital, that's a big problem. But on the other hand, looking at Descent 2nd Edition, we had the core Overlord, we had the card-based cooperative, and we had the app version. I've played the app version. There were some things, being a first example of it, I think their first foray into app-based board gaming support. Mansions of Madness might be there also a little bit. You guys will correct me on that. That might have been before Descent 2nd Edition. But that worked out in that I did enjoy playing it. I did like the surprise and the random generation and the bookkeeping that it did on the Overlord side. Yeah, there was a lot of advantages. I put up the iPad and I played it. But I wasn't wed to it. I could always go back to classic analog. So when I look at this new Descent, the miniatures look fantastic. I like the artwork. I like the overlay. But being attached to an app, that just, I don't know. I'm really on the fence about it, especially being a Descent enthusiast. And of course, there'll be DLC and they'll charge you for everything and future expansions. Although it looks like the expansions are going to be actual big box continuations. Maybe Fantasy Flight has figured out finally how to utilize all the space in the box to make it constructive, other than a box with an insert that you just cut up or throw out and then are stuck bagging everything together in your game. But from that perspective, it seems like what started with Descent 2nd Edition made the jump to Lord of the Rings, which I don't own, but a friend has. And I have to admit, it's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun to play. Fantasy Flight stepping out from the group seems to be app-based. And they want to go and push in that direction. Now, I'm stretching my memory back. You guys will correct me. There was a game, 10 years ago? Was it? It was Ars Golem or Arx Paxis or something where it was like a miniature-based game with a digital battlefield that played. And either the battlefield was the app or you had the app on your computer and it could control things. And I remember it was overly expensive, kind of buggy. Went fully discounted on Amazon and Miniature Market, and it was so discounted just for the lulz. I was thinking like, hey, this is a chance to pick this up and just have fun with it. But I didn't invest in it. I think that was the first app-based game where it's like, we're going to develop this game from the ground up, and it's going to be entirely app-based. So will this be a Gloomhaven killer? Will it upseat Gloomhaven? I think it's going to eventually come down to what we circled around in the beginning. What makes the game special? What gets you excited about it? And again, for Gloomhaven, it was the discovery and the ever-evolving and changing world, call it a legacy system, and the unlocking of character classes that I did not know ahead of time. If Fantasy Flight can take some angle like that, it could be a serious contender. If it's just an app to run a board game, well, I think we'll have to see. Your thoughts, and I'm just curious, if you are a Descent enthusiast where you've bought into second or first and second, do you see this as a natural extension in the journey? And if you are a Gloomhaven enthusiast, are you looking to cross over and play Descent?